Dateline, October 27th, 2011. Angry moderate. As the stock market at last time I looked was up about 400 points. But anyway, we'll get to that. So anyway, this is my erudite look. This is the angry moderate looking like he knows something. This is the angry moderate looking like he doesn't know as much. This is the angry moderate's coffee, speaking of himself in the third person. And this is the angry moderate's hand lotion, which I got today, which is called Pumpkin Hand Repair Cream. I could read it better with my glasses. It's really great stuff. Anyway, it smells fantastic. So I keep this out with me and to remind me of how excellent my hands smell using this pumpkin cream. Anyway, we need to get to business here on the Angry Moderate Show because there is, as always, a great deal to talk about when it comes to the world of finance, financialization, monetary theory, monetarism, modern monetary theory, post-Keynesianism, and all kinds of other mishigas. Mishigas, that would be a suburban Boston term, and if you don't know it, you can Google it. I'm not sure how you would spell it. My guess is M-I-S-H-I and then Goss. Anyway, my name is Dan Weintraub. I am the Angry Moderate. I'm not quite as angry as I was maybe a year and a half ago when I was doing this show. I think that I have mellowed out somewhat, despite the fact that I'm on my third cup of coffee today. The edges are a little less. But nonetheless, I do find that our overwhelming lack of understanding with regard to what's going on, not only in the world of finance, but with regard to politics and social issues is very concerning. And so I'm going to jump right in now to a discussion of an online blog piece by right-wing zealot, libertarian extraordinaire, and financial, I wouldn't say wizard, but I would say he knows his stuff, Karl Denninger. Karl Denninger from Niceville, Florida. You might have seen him sometimes. He's been interviewed on CNBC and other such news outlets. I have a hard time with him. I think that he is a pugnacious, somewhat bellicose individual. However, I do think he has some good points when it comes to money. So let's talk about Denninger's piece that's about Paul Krugman's piece, and then we will move on to my points with regard to his piece. How is that for circular thinking? Anyway, reading from my iPad with my reading glasses. By the way, this is a very new occurrence for me. 3-4 years ago, I had no problem reading material that was close up. Now, and this every day it gets worse. I'll go to meetings at my place of employment and we'll sit down and a piece of paper will come out and I'll pick it up and I'm like, oh, I can't read this. And I have to go find my glasses. So if I were to try and read this iPad, I'd be way out here. So now I go to CVS and I buy these glasses. And of course, I buy one pair and I misplace it, so I buy another pair, and then I end up buying like 6 pairs of reading glasses, the 2.5 magnification, and they're all over my apartment. I find them everywhere. I use one pair when I shave because I like to look and see, oh, I missed a spot there. But at some point, I'm going to probably have to go to the actual eye doctor. So if there are any eye doctors out there who want the business of a somewhat self-righteous, angry moderate, give me a call at 1-800, and I was going to make something up, but I'm not going to. Anyway, the Angry Moderate is going to respond to Denninger's piece. Denninger writes about Paul Krugman. How does someone this disingenuous get a PhD? So here's what Paul Krugman says, and then we'll say what Denninger says, and then I'll say why Denninger misses the boat. So Krugman says the following. Think about countries like Britain, Japan, and the United States, which have large debts and deficits, yet remain able to borrow at low interest rates. What's their secret? Asks Krugman. The answer, in large part, is that they retain their own currencies, and investors know that in a pinch, they could finance their deficits by printing more of those currencies. If the European Central Bank were to similarly stand behind European debts, the crisis would ease dramatically. Now, Krugman, in many respects, is correct. In a short-term window of time, Krugman is correct. Any nation that possesses the opportunity, do you see that spittle? Sorry. Any nation that has the ability to print its own money, or in the case of the United States, which with a fiat currency, the Federal Reserve is able to monetize U.S. debt Any nation that's able to do that never has to go bankrupt because they can always fiddle with the numbers at their central bank to, at least in the short term, service their obligations. Now, 3 weeks ago on The Angry Moderate, I talked about how we are moving in a direction with regard to austerity, and I blame predominantly the political right. I kind of put the political right on the what's the word here? It'll come to me. I blamed the political right for moving in an austerity, a direction of austerity, of spending cuts and freezes in Social Security benefits and all these things, and freezes in unemployment benefits as a way to get us back, our fiscal house in order. But I also said that one of the major problems with such an arrangement, with such a move, is that what you're doing is you're creating a lot of suffering. And you're not creating suffering for this supposed top 1%. I know that this top 1% has gotten a lot of billing recently with regard to the Occupy Wall Street protests. Hold on a sec. Dark roast. If you would like a fabulous cup of coffee, go to downtown White River Junction. Great coffee. Back to our program. So the problem with austerity, obviously, and Greece is finding that out now, and some of the other nations of Europe probably will too, is that when you start slashing spending on social programs, you get a lot of people who suffer. Well, not the top 1%, of course. The top 1% never suffers when it comes to financial issues. They might suffer, like you and I suffer, the woes of humanhood, but not when it comes to the financial side of things. And Krugman's argument, and many post-Keynesian thinkers, and many neoclassical economists, their argument is, and I know that sitting here and throwing around these words like post-Keynesianism and neoclassicalism, blah, 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 maybe it's a little pretentious. I'm not trying to be pretentious here. The point I'm trying to make is that a lot of scholarly economists who hold posts at the major universities, the economists at Tuck, for example, these folks oftentimes are cut from a cloth of neoclassical or modern economic thought in which money, the ideas of economics are based upon monetary theory. In other words, that money can be created, put into the economy, taken out of the economy, and that's how you're going to regulate demand, et cetera, and so forth. Well, Krugman's point, and the point of many of these economists, is that, look, if you have a downturn, if you have a difficulty with regard to things in the economy, if you have an economic crisis, caused, of course, by fraud, Denninger's going to say fraud, and I'm going to agree with him, but I'm going to disagree with his solution. If you have a terrible economic crisis, you can always, in a country that can print its own money, get out of that crisis in the near term, not in the long term. If you don't fix the laws, and if you don't cut back on the fraud in the long term, but in the short term, you can get out of that crisis mode by creating liquidity, printing money, tweaking the accounts at the Federal Reserve, right? And Krugman is essentially right. Look, the economy tanked in 2008, right? It tanked because we had had decades of total outright fraud in which the government went, we're not looking, because they were getting rich too. And you had an economic catastrophe with the collapse of Lehman, having to bail out AIG, TARP, and its $750 billion that was going to all of these banks that were undercapitalized, et cetera. You had an economic crisis, and you had at one point what looked like, and I was on this bandwagon too. It looked like we were going to have out and out collapse. I was thinking as I was watching this, like, oh my gosh, this is going to be like the Great Depression. Now, of course, one place where I dropped the ball in my analysis was that I did not believe that the amount of liquidity that could be added to the system by the Federal Reserve would have the effect that it did. And it did. In the short term, creating trillions of dollars, which, by the way, 90% of which were gobbled up by the wealthiest corporations and individuals in the world. More than 90%. Creating all of that liquidity did temporize or kick that can down the road, push back that point where you get to the edge of the cliff. It did allow us to continue to fund Social Security. It did allow us to continue to fund unemployment insurance and SNAP, food stamp, and all of those things that we need to do in order to keep the wheels from really falling off. But it's a short-term fix. The thing about iPads that's weird is they turn off. Okay, this is back on now. So Krugman is correct, I would say, that if you are, oh look, it's connecting to the, wow, I have a Wi-Fi connection here. Krugman is correct. If you, in the short term, print more money, you can, in the short term, stave off austerity and create a situation in which that bottom tier, that the working class, the middle class, etc., does not fall off a cliff. Now, Denninger goes on to say, he talks about borrowing and multiples. He says, if you print money, you're rendering the value of lending negative in the future. You're borrowing from the present you're borrowing from the future to pay for things in the present, etc., and so forth. And he goes on to say this: when one talks about making it easier to cover debt through monetary manipulation, what we're really talking about is stealing from those who would otherwise form capital. See, these people are the prudent, those who did not partake of the Ponzi schemes. Now, Denninger's right. Denninger's totally right. Look, our entire financial system is a gambling casino now. You look at the stock market today. Today's October 27th, 2011. The stock market, the Dow was up 400 points. NASDAQ was up almost 100 points. We're talking 4.5%. Now, is this based upon the real profits of companies? Of course not. Companies might say, BP, British Petroleum, said the other day, oh, we've become much more profitable. Well, why have they become more profitable? Is it because oil is at $80 to $85 a barrel, but we're still having to pay $3.50 a gallon for gasoline? Is it because they canned 100,000 workers potentially and then cut back on their expenses, or they got rid of... Profitability obviously is based upon the calculus between how much you're putting out in spending and what you're bringing in, and what you're valuing your assets in the marketplace. Now remember, about a year and a half ago, it became legal for companies doing business in the United States to they do not have to value their assets to the marketplace. In other words, companies don't have to value their assets, and banks, financial companies, based upon how much those assets would sell for in the open market. They can essentially, instead of marking them to the marketplace, they can mark their assets however they'd like to. So financial companies can claim profitability because they can value their assets however they'd like. There are still trillions and trillions of dollars of outstanding derivatives contracts and credit default swap contracts that nobody has any idea how those are going to pan out in the future, but at least in the short term, they seem profitable. So companies can claim profitability. Now, all of this gambling that goes on in the stock market, a huge amount of it isn't done by, these people. You think that there are traders, lots of traders on the floor of the stock market like there were in the movie, that wasn't the stock market, it was the commodities market, Trading Places with Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy. Remember? Switching cameras. Remember that great movie? Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy are on the floor of the commodities exchange trading frozen orange juice, and there are men and the women and the screaming and that happens far less now. Most of the trading that goes on, of course, is done by computers, by enormous server bays and thousands of computer terminals across I guess is that the East River, the Hudson River, in New Jersey, or on Staten Island. And these computers use high-speed algorithmic trading software to front run each other. It is a virtual gambling casino for those who would try to make their millions and billions of dollars on these minute trades, but these billions of minute trades. It is not a measure, as it used to be, of profitability. So when I was young, and I was first becoming not really interested in finance. I was kind of just interested in what this whole stock market thing was back when I was in high school. And I was talking to a friend of my father's, and he said, look, you invest in companies based upon what you see at the mall. You invest in TJ Maxx, you invest in these companies. No longer is that the case. People don't invest in those companies because they are profitable. People invest in those companies, and computer programs buy the stocks of these companies because they get on a roll, and it becomes like a gambling. It is a veritable gambling casino. Now, what Denninger says here is true. A Ponzi scheme, as you know, is when someone starts it's a pyramid scheme. When somebody starts an idea that you're going to buy into, and the people who buy into it early get returns because more and more people are buying into it. But in the end, if it's a big Ponzi scheme, hundreds of thousands of people are left holding this empty bag because all of the people who started it and got in early get out and run away with all the money they were able to make. And the markets have become, to a great extent, a Ponzi scheme, where people are buying into these scams, these multi-trillion-dollar scams, and getting out as early as they can. They're getting their commission checks, they're making all of their millions, and they're getting out. And in the end, the assets that back up these so-called investments are pretty much worthless assets. I mean, the housing industry for the last 15 years was, to a great extent, a Ponzi scheme, because you had millions and millions of mortgages that were underwritten, that were fraudulent, because no one was going to be able to afford to pay back those mortgages, and the value of the homes was inflated beyond, to the moon, because the more and more people who are bidding on the houses, of course, you bid the price of the house up. Anyway, Denninger, putting on my glasses again because I just can't see, Denninger talks about this being a Ponzi scheme. And he says, those who did not partake of Ponzi schemes. In the United States, this is typically the base of retired people who have amassed capital in various forms throughout their lives, with the worst impact coming to the prototypical, quote, little old lady, end quote, who was living off her certificates of deposit that she amassed by spending less than she made through her working life. Krugman, of course, this is Denninger, doesn't want to talk about this sort of raw intentional theft from the public, because if he did in an honest fashion, those little old ladies might get the idea in their heads that lynching those who advocate stealing them is a good idea. Okay, now is where where Denninger starts to miss the boat. Because what Denninger starts to say is, look, he says, it is the natural economic condition for there to be mild deflation in the economy. I would not disagree with that argument. And then he goes on to say, in the end analysis, what these folks are arguing for, and he talks about Krugman and the monetarists, is a form of economic theft. That is, they are arguing for stealing through subterfuge, I love that word, the capital that others have accumulated through their own prudence so as to give it to those who are imprudent, backstopping their stupidity. And then comes the big sentence from our friend Carl Denninger at marketticker.org. This, he says, is economic communism. It's the principle that through central control, backed up with the initiation of force by the state, one can make a more perfect economy. Communism, when recognized as such, tends to evoke strong reactions among Americans, blah, 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 blah. And then he goes on to say, haven't we had enough communism in our nation in being forced to bail out the banks for their bad investments in car companies, housing, and speculation in various forms of debt instruments where they knew full well they were selling dog poop and similar, etc. and so forth.